Number 15. Rebecca Chandler and Raven Larrabee. In 2011, a man traveled by bus from Phoenix, Arizona, all the way to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to have a threesome with two girls he had met online. Rebecca Chandler was 22 and Raven Larrabee was 18. Little did he know what other plans they had in store for him. The duo actually turned out to be blood-hungry Satan worshippers looking for their next victim. They tied him down with duct tape and began to have relations with him as promised. Everything was going great until he was ready to leave. Instead of letting him go, they pulled out a knife. They proceeded to cut him over and over again on his neck, legs, arms, and back. For more than 2 days, he was repeatedly stabbed and kept against his will. The cuts ranged from shallow slashes to deep puncture wounds. Exactly what the purpose of their ritual was never released. Their satanic sex play ended only after the man broke free from his restraints and ran outside for help. When police found him, he was covered in more than 300 wounds and bleeding heavily. A detective was able to follow the blood spatters all the way to the young girl's apartment, where they found a large concentration of blood on the floor and on the bed itself. Worst of all, investigators found that the women owned a pit bull that they had most likely been abusing. A deep cut was found in the animal's neck that was similar in length to the cuts that were found on the victim. Despite all of this, police were unable to prove that the sex acts were non-consensual and had to let the pair go without any charges. Exactly what happened to their dog is unknown. Number 14. Marge Snyder. In 1991, Marge Snyder was a 37-year-old. She had spent the past 15 years in and out of psychiatric wards due to multiple personalities. She was eventually put on social disability and allowed to live on her own, but she needed to see a psychologist at least twice a week in order to keep receiving payment. The last thing her psychologist ever expected to uncover was evidence of a massive satanic cult. Through extensive therapy, Marge was able to uncover the root of all of her personality disorders. She had been repressing painful memories of being sexually abused hundreds of times in satanic orgies. The cult was led by none other than her father. With her psychologist's help, Marge began to remember how she became pregnant no less than 3 times, and how after each delivery, her father sacrificed the newborn baby in the name of Satan. This evil and traumatic lifestyle forced Marge to develop multiple personalities as a way to distance herself from the pain and guilt she felt on a day-to-day basis. The psychologist was convinced these memories were not mere fabrications. Keep in mind that Marge was speaking to a licensed professional who was trained to tell the difference between a patient telling the truth and a patient having a schizophrenic breakdown. No matter how many times Marge was asked to repeat herself, every detail of her stories remained the same. Although the medical community remains divided as to what truly happened, Marge insists that she is telling the truth. Many ask why the police have not investigated further, and Marge replies that they are in on the cult. It may sound a bit far-fetched, but then again, there is at least one psychologist who completely believes her. Number 13. Animal sacrifices. In 2013, a large farm in the UK became the target of repeated animal attacks by a satanic cult. In the first attack, 4 of the family's ducks were decapitated and laid out in pairs. That same night, a goat named Minstrel had the top half of its horn ripped off, and a horse had one of its shoes pried off with a crowbar. These all happened to be common ingredients for satanic rituals. The attacks soon grew more bold and vicious over time. 1 month later, a different pet goat named Chocolate had his neck broken and his head completely cut off. The goat's skin was sliced off and carefully laid next to his severed head, along with most of its amputated organs. After a lamb was mutilated soon after, the family had finally had enough. They moved all of the remaining animals to someplace safe while they tried to catch the people responsible. Unfortunately, the cult was never found. Just 6 years prior, a different family who lived nearby had 100 of their sheep killed. The animals' eyes, tongues, and genitalia were all mysteriously removed. Locals are sure that this incident is tied with the newer attacks, but nothing has been proven yet. Number 12. The Sons of Baphomet. In March of this year, a satanic gang in Mexico convinced a 24-year-old restaurant worker named Edwin Juarez Palma to meet them after his shift to join their cult. When they said his initiation ritual involved tying his hands behind his back, Edwin eagerly obeyed without a second thought. And that's when things went horribly wrong. As soon as his hands were tied, one of the gang members changed their mind about what the ritual should be. They decided that he should be allowed to join their cult still, but it should be as a vampire. Of course, in order for this to happen, they reasoned that they would have to kill him first. They each took turns strangling Edwin, beating him and torturing him with broken glass bottles. They grew tired of doing this to him after some time, and they stabbed him in the throat with a shard of glass to end it all. They tried to clean up the crime scene with bleach, but they left enough evidence behind for the authorities to track them down. The 3 Satanists are currently awaiting trial. Each of them faces up to 40 years if they are convicted of murder. Number 11. Ricky Kasso. Ricky Kasso was involved in a satanic cult known as the Knights of the Black Circle. He and about 20 other local teenagers were known to hold black magic gatherings and perform rituals with stolen neighborhood pets, often torturing them at length before burning them to death. When Ricky was arrested for opening a 19th century casket and stealing a skull and a hand to use in a ritual, he was given a trial date and was released. Little did police know that Ricky would take this final opportunity as a free man to murder in the name of Satan. Unsurprisingly, Ricky was a psychopathic drug addict who smoked a lot of PCP. Sometime earlier, a man named Gary Lowers had stolen 10 bags of the powdery substance from him, which infuriated him to no end. Even though Gary had given back half of it, he still owed Ricky $50 for the rest, thus making him the perfect target for a revenge killing that would also surely impress the Dark Lord himself. With death on his mind, Ricky grabbed 2 of his evil friends, and together they all convinced Gary to forget about the stupid money he owed and come hang out. They all got high of a hallucinogenic drug called mescaline and started the bonfire in the woods. That's when Ricky bit Gary's neck and stabbed him in the chest. Gary fell to the ground, stunned. Ricky continued to methodically torture him using a blade, and he severely burned his most sensitive areas while he was at it too. Whenever Gary would get a burst of adrenaline and try to run away, Ricky's satanic friends would drag him back to the fire for more stabbings and brutal torture. Ricky took hours to slowly kill his victim, taking great pride in his suffering the whole time. When he felt like Gary finally had enough, he told the 17-year-old victim to say that he loved Satan. When Gary said that he loved his mother instead, Ricky heard a crow call out to him in the distance. He knew that the bird was really Satan, instructing him to gouge out Gary's eyes, and that's exactly what he did. The 3 proud murderers didn't bury the body for 10 full days. Instead, they bragged about their bloody achievement, and they showed the corpse to anyone who didn't believe them. This is also how they quickly got caught, though. After 1 year in prison, Ricky hung himself in his cell. Perhaps Satan was whispering, "Good job," into his ear as he died. Number 10. Nikolai Ogolobayak. In June of 2008, a group of Russian friends went into the woods. 4 of them had been pre-selected by the group to serve as sacrifices. They were forced to drink more alcohol than they could stand while under the threat of violence should they disobey. Each of them were around 16 or 17 at the time. When they were too drunk to properly defend themselves, their Satanist friends attacked. Unbeknownst to their victims, this murder was actually an initiation ritual for new members to join a cult. The recruits counted out loud as they stabbed the victims 666 times each. All of them were stabbed repeatedly in the genitals, possibly while still alive. With their murder ritual complete, the teens started a bonfire and ate some of their remains to gain their power. They finished their night out by sacrificing a rodent and crucifying it, on an upside-down cross before returning to their homes. They may have gotten away with satanic murder if not for just one thing. Earlier that night, one of the victims, a girl named Varia, had made a phone call to her friend. She said that something wasn't right about the people she was hanging out with. This call is what led to the arrest of 8 cult members. Police thought they had caught everybody until they realized that all of the victims had called the number of a boy named Nikolai Ogolobayak on the night of their deaths. Even though he was a former choir boy, police knew that he was the leader of a cult and went out to investigate. When they searched his property, they found a pit full of body parts nearby. Arms, legs, heads, hearts, scalps, and genitalia had all been thrown together into a shallow grave. The body parts had since been used for other rituals and had satanic imagery carved into the flesh. One of the suspects, a boy named Alexander, confessed that he had dug up the body of a girl and eaten her heart. I tried to turn to God, he said, but it didn't bring me any money. I prayed to Satan, and things improved. Alexander, Nikolai, and the others were sentenced to 20 years in prison for the murders. One of them was found to have schizophrenia and was committed to a mental institution instead. Another one of the culprits received a lesser sentence for only watching the murders without participating. Number 9. The Ripper Crew. This satanic gang will drive around in a windowless van looking for prostitutes to sacrifice. Their leader, Robin Gecht, had an apartment that the trio would bring young women back to. When they got home, they had a satanic murder ritual that they liked to play out over and over again. First, they would chop a breast off of their victim while they were still alive. Next, Robin would read passages out of the Satanic Bible as they listened and slowly chewed on the severed body part. The disgusting maniacs would often violate the victim's wound until they climaxed, at which point they would then dispose of the body. The group murdered a handful of women in this fashion from 1981 until 1982. That was when a victim named Beverly Washington was found barely alive near the railroad tracks with her left breast cut off. She described the van the three were driving in. This information led police to a group of men who all lived close to the sites where the bodies were found. 2 of them made confessions, and Robin was arrested, though he always maintained his innocence. He was sentenced to 120 years in prison. His accomplices, however, admitted everything, and they were given the death sentence. Number 8. Hatred. In 1995, Royce, Jacob, and Joseph were 3 teenage metalheads growing up in Nipomo, California. They had a death metal band called Hatred that they were pretty proud of, but they wanted to gain a reputation as being one of the craziest bands to ever exist. To achieve this, they made a promise to the devil that they would sacrifice a blonde virgin to him. Her name was Elise Parler, and she was only 15 years old when the 3 boys invited her over to smoke marijuana. When they were finished smoking, Jacob took off his belt and strangled her as Casey held her down. Joseph then stood over her and stabbed her in the neck multiple times while she struggled for her life. He gave the knife to Jacob so that he could take a stab, and Jacob passed it on to Royce. Elise was stabbed 12 times in total and slowly bled to death while they took her virginity. They buried her in a shallow grave and told some of their friends about the murder, but no one believed them. During this time, Jacob returned to the body and had his way with it again. It wasn't until Royce had a change of religion that he confessed his crimes to the police. Royce said that his bandmates were going to kill again soon, and he feared this time it could be him. When the police investigator asked him why he had committed the murder, Royce calmly replied that it was to receive power from the devil so that he could play the guitar better. He and his friends were handed a sentence of 26 years of life behind bars. Number 7. Daniel and Manuela Ruda. When police caught up with 26-year-old Daniel Ruda and his 23-year-old wife, Manuela, the two had no problem admitting that they killed a man named Frank Hagen. What they would not admit, however, was that they were murderers. That's because, in their minds, Satan made them do it. "I got the order to sacrifice a human for Satan," Daniel told the court during his trial. Manuela agrees, stating that it wasn't murder, it was the execution of an order. Satan ordered us to, it simply had to be. After thinking about it for a moment, she added, "We wanted to make sure that the victim suffered well." And suffer he did. They invited Frank over to their apartment and they beat him senseless with a hammer. They used the scalpel to inflict dozens of painful incisions while he was still alive, and they carved a pentagram into his chest before stabbing him deeply in his stomach and letting him die. A German judge showed more compassion to them than they showed to their victim. Both of them were committed to a psychiatric hospital instead of prison. Number 6. Moses. A man named Moses Meraz Espinoza was only 18 when he walked into the Los Angeles Police Department with a shocking confession. He had recently strangled his mother to death for Satan. Police entered his apartment in Maywood and followed a trail of blood to the bathroom, where they found he had covered the walls and floor with layers of plastic wrap. Plugged into the wall was an electric saw. Fresh chunks of bone and gristle were drying on the blade. In the freezer, police found Moses' mother's skin and muscle all wrapped up in plastic storage bags. Her rotting skull was found with all of its teeth pulled out and the eyes removed. Moses had carved an inverted cross deep into the bone before stashing it inside of his backpack for later rituals. He said that he needed help getting rid of the body, so he called one of his cousins. However, instead of helping, she told him to call the cops instead. He thought about it for a bit and took her advice. A judge sentenced him to 25 years to life. Here's a strange twist to an already bizarre story. According to Moses, he had 2 other Satanists help him dismember the body. They were never found, and neither was his mother's internal organs. Whatever rituals they were used for is anyone's guess. Number 5. Jose Reyes and Victor Alas. In February of 2014, 2 Texas teenagers spent an entire night torturing a 15-year-old girl named Corian Cervantes to death. They did it for no other reason than to sell their soul to the devil. Jose and Victor lured the young girl into an abandoned apartment in Houston. When she got deep into the apartment, they attacked her with everything available. Victor used his belt to strangle her, while Jose beat her over the head with everything from an ashtray to a ceramic toilet lid. She bit one of them and started to run around the property in a panic. "Why are you doing this to me?" she asked them while fleeing. When they caught up to her, the 2 of them used a plastic curtain rod to poke both of her eyes out so that she couldn't run away again. Then they stabbed her with a screwdriver over 60 times, carved an inverted cross into her stomach, and molested her well after she had died. Corian was so badly abused that her corpse could not be positively identified. Only after the 2 confessed her name were investigators able to close the case. They showed no regrets and were sentenced to life in prison. Number 4. Pablo Vasquez. Otherwise known as the Texas Vampire, Pablo Vasquez met a 12-year-old boy while at a party in the city of Donna. He was drunk and high when Satan told him to sacrifice the child immediately. Pablo did as he was told without a moment's hesitation. He took a piece of pipe and struck the boy in the head repeatedly. When the boy was barely breathing, he took a shovel and brought it down on his throat. Then, he kneeled down and started to drink the blood as it spurted out of the wound. When police uncovered the buried body of 12-year-old David Cardenas, one of his arms was completely missing and the other one was a stump. There was no skin on his back at all, and he had a hole in the back of his head. "The devil was telling me to take it away," Pablo later said as he explained why he tried to unsuccessfully decapitate the boy. "The blood was dripping and I got it all over my face, so I don't know. I mean, something just told me to drink." This tragic murder occurred in April of 1998. Pablo was executed by lethal injection nearly 20 years later, in April of 2016. Nobody knows what he did with the boy's skin and arms. Number 3. Zachary King. Zachary King began practicing black magic at the age of 10. By the age of 13, he had found a satanic cult to call his own. 1 year later, he was helping doctors perform satanic acts inside of abortion clinics. According to Zachary, he would take a scalpel and make the first incision. A trained abortion doctor would then finish the procedure and rip out the baby while adults chanted all around him. The doctor would throw the baby onto the floor, and members of Zachary's cult would usually eat it. Zachary did this procedure 5 times before becoming a high wizard. Once he hit this rank, he was popular enough to be invited by satanic societies from all over. They used him to perform the dark ritual 141 more times. Cops and sheriffs were often bribed to not investigate any further. That is, if they weren't already a part of the organization themselves. Zachary says that the abortions were ultimately used as a way to dedicate a steady supply of young souls to Satan. He says that many of the abortionists were Satanists themselves, and that at the end of the day, he would help them perform rituals that would ensure all the unborn souls went straight to hell. Number 2. Satanic weddings. It may seem like a strange thought, but devil worshippers often fall madly in love. When they do, it's time for a satanic wedding. Although this dark ceremony has been banned in many parts of the world, it still continues to spread everywhere. A satanic wedding uses a dozen black candles for light. A single red candle sits in the center of the room on an altar, along with a sword, a chalice, 2 wedding rings, incense, and a gong. The gold demon known as Baphomet hangs on the wall to watch over the bride and groom, who can either wear clothing or go naked if they so choose. A Baphomet amulet must be worn around their necks at all times. Oddly enough, the ritual involves bridesmaids, ushers, and even a flower girl. The priest can be a man or a woman, and same-sex marriages have been allowed since the very beginning. The best man strikes the gong 3 times slowly to begin the ceremony. The priest invokes the name of Satan and concedes to his dark powers. He also pays respects to 15 other gods and goddesses, including the goddess of love and the Egyptian gods of the moon and the sun. The audience is expected to repeat every deity's name as soon as the priest says it. Next, the priest holds up the red candle and calls upon the elements of fire. He does the same for the elements of air, earth, and for water, each time holding up a different object from the altar as he speaks. In Satanism, these elements of nature are what makes the bride and groom's love possible, and the priest must acknowledge them. He then ties the bride and groom together by their right hand as he explains to them the difference between man and women. According to the Church of Satan, the bride carries with her the dark energy of Babylon, otherwise known as the Mother of Abominations. She is dark, but also soft and intuitive. The groom carries with him the masculine powers of Satan. Together, their powers can supposedly find balance as they become one. The bride and groom take turns holding a dagger and say their vows, each pledging their souls only to each other instead of any mere god. They compare the power of their love for each other to that of a dagger, and then they dip its blade into a chalice full of wine. Their hands are untied and they put the rings on each other's fingers. After the priest shouts, "Hail Satan!" the couple have officially united in the eyes of Lucifer. Now, before we move on to number 1, have you heard of any satanic activity in your area? I'm really curious about how much of this is still going on around the world. I'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a comment and tell us. Oh, and while you're at it, give us a like as well. It really helps us out more than you think it does. Number 1. Satanic funerals. According to the Satanic Scriptures by Peter H. Gilmore, satanic funerals can come in many forms. Cremations, burials at sea, and traditional coffin burials are all permissible. Similarly, the type of cemetery in which they are buried doesn't matter. Surprisingly, non-Satanists are welcome to attend satanic funerals. They can wear whatever they want, but Satanists must distinguish themselves by wearing the Baphomet amulet as well as a piece of white clothing, for white is the color of death in Satanism. The leader of the funeral ceremony, also known as the celebrant, is encouraged to wear a sash with a skull and crossbones. Traditional black robes are preferred, but not necessary. A satanic funeral has 2 altars. On one altar are many of the same items that are needed for a satanic wedding, and on the other are 2 black candles along with some possessions that at once belonged to the deceased. If the person's body has been cremated, then the celebrant is encouraged to lay a real human skull on the altar to represent them in their absence. A black candle is lit near the deceased person's head, and this represents what's known as the Black Flame, or the connection that Satanists feel with Satan himself. This candle is used to light smaller black candles that are held by the funeral participants. You can supposedly feel the forbidden power of Satan while holding this, though I would never dare to try. They were encouraged to meditate at the altar and shared some of their possessions as tribute to the deceased. Using the black flame candle, the celebrant lights the 2 black candles on the altar and begins a process to purify the air. He sounds a gong 9 times while turning counterclockwise, each time pausing to face north, south, east, and west. Each of these directions represent the sacred elemental powers of fire, earth, air, and water. Next, he invokes Satan through a long and elaborate passage called the Hymn of Satan. 15 other lesser gods and goddesses are also invoked. These deities are different than the 15 who are called upon during weddings. They range from ancient Aztec gods to Pluto, who is the Greek king of the underworld. The congregation is expected to chant each god's name as soon as it passes over the celebrant's lips. The celebrant concludes the ceremony by saying, "Arise, O gods of the abyss, and bear witness to these testimonials that celebrate the life of one who was thy kith and kin." After more satanic recitations, the congregation is allowed to speak about their memories of the deceased. The candles are extinguished, and the evil ceremony is over. Hello everyone, Sir Aim here. Thank you so much for watching this video. I have to say, this was maybe one of my favorites that I've done so far. Satanic rituals always have that kind of weird atmosphere about them. I wonder what a satanic wedding would actually be like if you were there. Anyway, over on my channel, I've been reading the best stories you can find online. So if you're interested in those, why don't you pop by? Just look in the description, there should be a link over there that'll take you right to my channel. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. Again, tell me if you've heard of any satanic activity near your hometown. And I will see you next time.